Good morning, you guys. We're going to continue our work today looking at Reconstruction, specifically looking at the KKK and other white supremacist terrorist organizations that emerged in the South during this time period. So you guys got a new set of primary sources on Google Classroom today. And we're going to go through all of those today, but you're going to have today and tomorrow to do the CFUs that go with that. Okay, so there'll be a new one tomorrow, but there'll be no new primary sources tomorrow. Okay, so all the ones for both today and tomorrow we'll be going over today. Okay, before we hop into those, were there any questions from the ones we looked at yesterday? Okay, we did start looking at the KKK yesterday, so any questions we have there? All right, as always, if you do have questions, just leave them in the stream, okay, and I'll do my best to answer them as we're going. Okay. Also, as always, please make sure you do have the documents in front of you. Again, they were on your Google Classroom. Okay, I will be reading them, but please be following along. Okay, any questions we have, okay, we'll try and break them down together. Okay, so starting off with document A. So the following is excerpted from the 1872 testimony of Abram Colby, an African-American legislator from Georgia, given before a congressional committee formed to investigate violence against freed people in the South. Okay, so this is from Colby, right, who is testifying before Congress about the violence going on in the South during Reconstruction, right? And this is from 1872. Okay, so we're going to see what Colby says, and then the questions from the congressman as they're investigating, and then Colby's answers. Okay, again, so back and forth. All right, so to start off, Colby. On the 29th of October, 1869, the Klansmen broke my door open, took me out of bed, took me to the woods, and whipped me 3 hours or more and left me for dead. They said to me, "Do you think you will ever vote another damned radical ticket?" I said, "If there was an election tomorrow, I would vote the radical ticket." They set in and whipped me 1,000 licks more with sticks and straps that had buckles on the ends of them. Okay, so looking at that, right, when they said, "Would you vote the radical ticket?" Right, talking about radical Republicans, right? So again, we see that most African Americans, right, in the South during this time, right, are voting for the radical Republican Party, because that is the party that's supporting their rights. Okay, so, right, that's obviously the ones that's going to get their vote. Okay, and as we talked about yesterday, the KKK and other organizations like it, okay, were often Democrats at this time, right, who are trying to prevent African Americans and others from supporting the Republicans so that the Democrats who are against giving most African Americans rights at this time, okay, would come back into power, right, and be able to reestablish those conditions in the South that it was like before the end of the Civil War. All right, so the congressman now is going to ask, "What is the character of those men who were engaged in whipping you?" And Colby's going to answer, "Some are first-class men in our town. One is a lawyer, one a doctor, and some are farmers. They had their pistols, and they took me in my night clothes and carried me from home. They hit me 5,000 blows. I told President Grant the same that I tell you now. They told me to take off my shirt. I said I never do that for any man. My drawers fell down about my feet, and they took hold of them and tripped me up. Then they pulled my shirt over my head. They said I had voted for Grant and had carried the Negroes against them. About 2 days before they whipped me, they offered me $5,000 to go with them and said they would pay me $2,500 in cash if I would let another man go to the legislature in my place. I told them I would not do it if they would give me all the county was worth. The worst thing was my mother, wife, and daughter were in the room when they came. My little daughter begged them not to carry me away. They drew up a gun and actually frightened her to death. She never got over it until she died. That was the part that grieves me the most." Okay, so looking at what Colby's saying here, right, the members of the KKK that came to torture him are from a wide range of society, as we looked at yesterday, right? So they are upper class, wealthy men, right, lawyers, doctors, and some are farmers, right? So they are poorer farmers as well as upper class people, right? Okay, so the people who make up this organization span the range, okay, throughout Southern society. Okay, And as we looked at yesterday, right, using violence, right, pistols, whipping, breaking into people's homes, scaring their families, as well as taking them and torturing them, right? So this man was they tried to bribe him first, right, because he was voted into lost it. Okay, the legislature, right? So into Congress. Okay, and they didn't want him to go because he was African American, right? So they're saying, okay, we'll pay you to not go. And he says, no, right? I was voted in, right? I'm serving my country. I'm standing up for what I'm allowed to do according to the Constitution and what my rights are and the rights for my fellow citizens, right? So they tried to bribe him. When that didn't work, they tried to torture and intimidate him and his family. Okay, so the next question by the Congress was, how long before you recovered from the effects of this treatment? And Colby answered, I have never gotten over it yet. They broke something inside of me. I cannot do any work now, though I always made my living before in the barber shop, hauling wood, etc. Okay, so Colby's saying, right, this isn't something you get over, right? It's a traumatic experience, right, that has stayed with him his whole life. And as he said in his previous statement, it stayed with his daughter until she died, okay, eventually, right? And this doesn't go away. The congressman asks next, you spoke about being elected to the next legislature. And Colby answered, yes, sir, but they run me off during the election. They swore they would kill me if I stayed. The Saturday night before the election, I went to church. When I got home, they just peppered the house with shot and bullets. Okay, so again, he was being elected again, right? And they shot up his house, right? To, again, try and either kill or intimidate him and his family, right? To go away, to not participate, to not exercise his right to vote, to not exercise his right to be elected to office. Okay, so again, we're seeing specific cases now of the intimidation and terrorist tactics that the KKK is using at this time. Again, this is in the 1870s. Any questions on document A? All right, we're going to move on to document B. So this is by historian Eric Foner. Okay, and he writes how the KKK drew support from many more people than those who directly commit violence or threatening acts against freed people and white Republicans, okay, which we've talked about a little bit already. So, of course, most white Southerners did not commit criminal acts, and some spoke out against the Klan, but the large majority of Southern whites remained silent. Indeed, the Democratic Party's constant vilification of carpetbaggers and scallywags as corrupt incompetents, their insistence that blacks were unfit for equal citizenship, and their public comments about the intractability of black labor created an atmosphere that made violence seem a legitimate response in the eyes of many white Southerners. Community support for the Klan extended to lawyers who represented the criminals in court, editors who established funds for their defense, and the innumerable women who sewed costumes and disguises for them. While most white Southerners were law-abiding citizens, they seemed willing to forgive the Klan's excesses because they shared the organization's ultimate goal, the overthrow of Reconstruction and the restoration of white supremacy. Okay, so we talked about this yesterday, right? How many people in the South, right, many white Southerners weren't part of the Klan, but they still supported the Klan, right? They still supported the KKK. So members of the KKK and many members of the Democratic Party, particularly in the South, are going to portray African Americans as villains. Also, carpetbaggers, okay, right? It mentions here, carpetbaggers are people from the North who are moving down, right? They're the kind of suitcases they used to carry were made of carpet-like material, right? So they were known as carpetbaggers, right? And they were particularly hated, right? Because the South saw Northerners coming in and kind of taking over their communities. Yeah, so hated African Americans, carpetbaggers, and scalawags, okay, which was the name for other whites in the South who were supporting the Republican agenda, supporting Reconstruction, okay, in general, the changing of their way of life, right? They were known as scalawags. Okay, so these groups of people, right, whether they're from the North, from the South supporting, or African Americans, were the typical targets of the KKK, right? And it was very hard to imprison them even when they were caught because we see so much community support. Okay, so even if they weren't themselves doing the violence and intimidation, okay, people were, right? Lawyers were defending the KKK in court. Cops were not arresting them, right? People are giving them money so that they can defend themselves in court or further carry out their terrorist actions. Okay, different women are sewing the costumes, right? The white hoods and things like that for the KKK, right? So because they have all this other support, and even if you're not supporting them, you're not speaking up, okay, they continue for a long time, right? And we see them even today, right? So as we've seen throughout history, right, if you don't speak up, right, things are going to continue, right? If you want to change things, then you need to change them. If you're not doing something about it, right, then you're allowing it to continue, right? And so many people were allowing it to continue. Many people were supporting them, even if they weren't participating. Okay. Any questions with document B before we move on? All right, so we're going to move into document C. In his 1935 book, Black Reconstruction in America, W.E.B. Du Bois analyzes the sources of the power of the Ku Klux Klan in this way, right? So W.E.B. Du Bois, right, is a prominent African-American writer, okay, and he does a lot of different things. And so this is him talking about Reconstruction and the KKK. The method of force which hides itself in secrecy is a method as old as humanity. The kind of thing that men are afraid or ashamed to do openly, and by day, they accomplish secretly, masked, and at night. The method has certain advantages. It uses fear to cast out fear. It dares things at which open method hesitates. It may with certain impunity attack the high and the low. It need hesitate at no outrage of maiming or murder. It shields itself in the mob mind and then throws over all a veil of darkness which becomes glamour. It attracts people who otherwise could not be reached. It harnesses the mob. Total depravity, human hate, do not explain fully the mob spirit in America. Before the wide eyes of the mob is ever the shape of fear. Back of the writhing, yelling, cruel-eyed demons who break, destroy, maim, and lynch and burn at the stake is a knot, large or small, of normal human beings. And these human beings at heart are desperately afraid of something. Of what? Of many things, but usually of losing their jobs, being declassed, degraded, or actually disgraced. Of losing their hopes, their savings, their plans for their children. Of the actual pangs of hunger, of dirt, of crime. And of all of this, most ubiquitous in modern industrial society is that fear of unemployment. It is its nucleus of ordinary men that continually gives the mob its initial and awful impetus. Around this nucleus, to be sure, gather snowball-wise all manner of flotsam filth and human garbage, and every lewdness of alcohol in current fashion. But all this is the horrible covering of this inner nucleus of fear. Okay. So there was a lot in there, but basically what he's saying, right, is that fear is at the center of this, okay? And it's both forming the KKK, right? It's formed based on fear, and then they're using that fear, right, to intimidate others, right? So things that people would normally never do, right, just out in the open where everyone knows who they are, right, and they would do it during the day, standing up tall, they're doing now, right? Because they're doing it in secret, right? They're wearing masks. They're part of a mob, right? They're part of a big group. So it's not, they don't see it as themselves, the individual, right? They're doing it at night, right? So they're hiding to do these awful things, right? And they're hiding behind these masks and hiding at night and using that as an excuse to do these awful things, okay? But it also says, right, that the basis of why this can even exist is also fear, right? He's saying that right? Most members of this group, or at least at the core of this group, is not someone different, right? It's ordinary people that are scared, right? And they're scared of losing their jobs, scared that their way of life is changing, right? And so they're lashing out with this despicable behavior, right? These terrorist organizations, right? Okay. But just as we've looked at in different times, right? We've analyzed Christopher Columbus, we've analyzed Abraham Lincoln, right? And other characters throughout history. Okay, looking at it, right? Okay, they've done bad things, they've done good things, right? And that's who people are, right? We're just people, right? No one is all bad, no one is all good, right? We're some mix of both of them together, right? And we can overall be more bad or more good, right? And that's part of who we are and how we can judge other people as well. But it's never simple, right? And so we see, right, these terrible organizations being formed, at least in part, because of the fear of change, because of the fear of what their children are going to have to go through, how life's changing, what fear of unemployment, fear of hunger, okay, these different types of things, which doesn't make it okay what they do, okay, by any stretch, okay, but it just gives us an insight to be able to understand different elements. Okay. Any questions there with document C? No? So we're going to move on to document D. So in August 1874, the White League murdered 6 white Republicans and as many as 20 black witnesses in Coushatta, Louisiana. Following the massacre, Louisiana Governor William Kellogg issued the following statement. Okay, so the White League is a very similar organization to the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, it's another white supremacist terrorist organization. There wasn't just one; there were numerous organizations with different names. Okay, that used very similar tactics. Right. So this one, the document we're about to read, right, the governor of Louisiana, right, is giving a statement after a massacre where the White League, in this case, right, is going to murder 6 white Republicans, okay, and as many as 20 black witnesses, right? So we already see, right, that they're not even sure about how many blacks were murdered here, right? It says as many as, right? So it's a little unsure, which means that they probably didn't put the same kind of effort, right, into looking into those murders, right? They say, okay, there were 6 white Republicans. We know exactly who they were, okay, and about 20 people, 20 blacks were killed as well, right? So you see that that unlevel playing field already, like looking at that, even from the side of people who weren't part of the massacre. Okay, so getting into his statement. Having felt it my duty to issue my proclamation offering a large reward for the apprehension and conviction of the murderers in the Coushatta outrage, and to the end that the law-abiding citizens of the state may fully comprehend the magnitude of the crime committed and be induced to render more active assistance to the officers of the law, I deem it proper to make the following statement. Right, so the governor is offering a reward and telling people that they need to help bring these people to justice, right? They need to make sure that they get the people who committed the murders. Okay. These facts are gathered from reliable information received at the executive department. And remember, the governor, the person talking here, right? He is the executive department of the state, right? The executive branch of the country, remember, right, is the president. Okay, executive branch of the state would be the governor, who is, again, the one giving this statement. On or about the 28th day of August, 1874, a body of persons belonging to a semi-military organization known as the White League of Louisiana assembled in the town of Coushatta, parish of Red River in this state, for the purpose of compelling by force of arms the state officers of that parish to resign their positions. Right, so saying that right on this day in 1874, okay, the terrorist organization known as the White League of Louisiana, right? So he frames it as semi-military, right? Gather in this town, okay? The parish would be the county, okay? And it's saying that they're going to force members of the state officers, right? So people who are elected to office to resign, to quit. Okay, that was their point, their purpose. And our question, would these different organizations fight each other, or would they cooperate? They would more often cooperate or leave each other alone. Okay, it would often be different organizations kind of in different areas. So each would sort of have their own territory, or they would cooperate in different cases. Good question. Yeah. So these officers were men of good character, most of them largely interested in planting and mercantile pursuits. They held their positions with the full consent of an admittedly large majority of the legal voters of the parish, this being a largely Republican parish, as admitted even by the fusion returning boards. Okay? So saying the men that were killed were good men, right? That's what the governor's saying, right? That these men who were murdered are good men, right? They were interested in farming, right? Planting and mercantile, right? Business, right? So these were good people. They were farmers. They were businessmen, right? And they were voted into office. Okay, and most of the people in his parish, right, right again, which is the county, are mostly Republican at this time. The only known objection to them was that they were of Republican principles. Frank S. Edgerton, the duly qualified sheriff of the parish, in strict compliance with the laws of this state and of the United States, summoned a posse comitas of citizens, white and colored, to assist him in protecting the parish officers in the exercise of their undoubted rights and duties from the threatened unlawful violence of the White Leagues. His posse, consisting of 65 men, was overpowered by a supreme force assembled from the adjacent parishes, and finally, after several colored and white men had been killed, surrendered themselves prisoners with the explicit guarantee that their lives would be spared if the more prominent Republicans would agree to leave the parish and those holding office would resign their positions. Okay, so we see the sheriff of the area, right, got together a posse, right, a group of citizens, okay, that are going to help him defend these people that are being threatened by the White League, right? And so people in his posse were both white and African American, right? So we see a mix there gathering to protect against the White League, right? And there were 65 of those men. Okay. But the White League had more men, right? Because they had men from different parishes or different counties in the region. Okay. And so the posse had to surrender, okay, under the condition that they would be okay, but that the Republicans would leave. Right. So again, we see this goal of groups like the White League, like the KKK, trying to get Republicans out of office, trying to get them to leave their area. Okay. These stipulations, though unlawfully extracted, were complied with on the part of the Republican officials, who were then locked up in the jail for the night. Okay, so they agreed to this, right? They said, okay, we give up. Okay, the Republicans say, okay, we'll leave. Okay, and they're put in jail, at least for that night. Okay, the following named persons were among those so surrendering and resigning: Homer J. Twitchell, planter and tax collector of Red River, and Deputy United States Postmaster in charge of the post office at Coushatta; Robert A. Dewey's, Supervisor of Registration, DeSoto Parish; Clark Holland, Merchant and Supervisor of Registration, Red River Parish; W.J. Howell, Parish Attorney and United States Commissioner; Fred S. Edgerton, Sheriff on Red River Parish; M.C. Willis, Merchant and Justice of the Peace, right? So we see these are the people, these are at least some of the people, right, that surrender and resign. Okay, so these are some of the Republicans, right, that are being kicked out of office by this violent group, right, by this terrorist organization. On the following morning, Sunday, the 30th of August, these persons were bound and conducted by an armed guard to the McFarland plantation just over the parish line of Red River, within the boundaries of Bossier Parish, about 40 miles east of the Texas line. There they were set upon and deliberately murdered in cold blood. Their bodies were buried near where they fell, without inquest or any formality whatsoever. Okay, so these people, okay, who surrendered, right, and who agreed to leave, were kept in jail that night. Then the next day they were marched, okay, to an area just outside of this parish, the Red River Parish or the Red River County, and they're murdered, right? They're killed there, okay, and just kind of buried wherever they happen to die. Okay, right? They weren't put in a cemetery, right? There was no, right at this time, right in the South, right? You're going to see a lot of religious beliefs, right? So the fact that they're not buried right in churchyard, right? There's no ceremony or anything, would have been hard for them to deal with, as well as obviously the fact that they're just murdered in cold blood, right? That's terrible, terrible occurrence. Okay, and finally, on the night preceding the surrender, a body of 40 members of the White League of Caddo Parish, mounted and armed, left the city of Shreveport and were seen riding in the direction of the place where the murder was subsequently committed. Okay, so we see more White League people, okay, coming from other areas to help support their the terrorist organization, right, of the White League that we see starting off these atrocities. Right, so we see more people going. Okay, and this is signed by the governor, William P. Kellogg. Okay. Any questions there? Okay, so again, we're seeing different instances, okay, of the terrorist acts committed by these white supremacist organizations, okay, to try and turn back the clock, right, recreate situations that were similar to what they would have experienced during slavery, okay, trying to kick out the Republicans who are the ones trying to change society, particularly in the South at this time. All right, we're going to move on to document E. Okay, this is from Bolton, Mississippi on October 13th, 1875. Okay, and it's to the governor. Okay, so Governor Ames. I am here in Jackson and cannot leave. The white peoples is looking for me on every train and have got men on every road watching for me. They have sworn to take my life because I am president of the club at Bolton. I wish you would, if please, protect me. I am in a bad fix with about 6 bales of cotton in the field and 150 bushels of corn to gather. No one to tend to it when I am gone. Tell me what to do, if you please. And this is by Lewis McGee, who's the president of the Bolton's Republican Club. Okay, so again, we see a member of the Republican Party, right, an organizer of the Republican Party in this part of Mississippi, right, in Bolton, okay, and being threatened with violence, okay, and not even being allowed to leave, right? He says that people are looking for him, right, checking all the trains, checking all the roads, so that he can't leave. He can't even run away, right? And they're trying to force him to, right, give up, right, and to not support the Republicans and to not lead others into supporting the Republicans at this time, right? And he's worried not only for his life, but also for his livelihood, right? He says, I can't go out and gather the cotton, right? I can't go out and gather the corn, right? I have no one else to help me, right? So he's reaching out to the governor to try and get some help there, okay? And this is again in 1875. Okay, any questions there with document E? All right, we've got 3 more docs, you guys. So we're going to move on to document F. The White League was a paramilitary group that was aligned with the Democratic Party in the South, right? So paramilitary, right? So they're a military kind of organization, but they don't work for the military, right? But they're a violent organization. I would call them a terrorist organization. Right? In 1874 and 1875, the White League was responsible for widespread violence against black and white Republicans in Louisiana and Mississippi. The group's platform from 1874 stated the following, right? So this is what the White League themselves say their point is, right? They wrote it down in 1874. So we're going to take a look. Disregarding all minor questions of principle or policy and having solely in view the maintenance of our hereditary civilization and Christianity menaced by a stupid Africanization, we appeal to men of our race, of whatever language or nationality, to unite with us against that supreme danger. A League of Whites is the inevitable result of that formidable, oath-bound, and blindly obedient League of the Blacks, which under the command of the most cunning and unscrupulous Negroes in the state, may at any moment plunge us into a war of races. It is with some hope that a timely and proclaimed union of the whites as a race, and their efficient preparation for any emergency, may arrest the threatened horrors of social war and teach the blacks to beware of further insolence and aggression, that we call upon the men of our race to leave in abeyance all lesser considerations, to forget all differences of opinion and all race prejudices of the past, with no object in view but the common good of both races, to unite with us in an earnest effort to reestablish a white man's government in the city and the state. Okay, so again, this is what the White League says. This is like their kind of mission statement. Okay, and so you see, right, that they are talking about trying to maintain their civilization, right? So the society that they grew up in, right, in the South when slavery was still existent, right? So they feel threatened by the equality of African Americans now, right? Now that slavery has been abolished. Okay, so they're obviously using, language, right? Stupid Africanization, right? Things that saying, oh, society is now going to become too Africanized, okay, because of this. Okay, and so they feel threatened by that, okay? And you can see, right, that they're making stuff up, right, to be able to make this threat seem real, seem big, right? Saying that there is, right, a league of blacks, right, of African Americans, right, who, right, are unscrupulous, right? They'll do whatever it takes, right? They're trying to take over society, which is not the case, right? And we see arguments like this even today, right? When one group of people is trying to fight for their rights, okay, another group is going to say that they're trying to take over society. And trying to get equality is not the same as trying to lower someone else's group. Okay, and so we see this kind of ridiculous argument still being used today. And but right, so using this threat of African, this threat, okay, of African Americans to try and gather white people, even if they disagree on other things, it's telling them, hey, you guys don't worry about that other stuff. This is a bigger issue. Right? So that's what the White League is trying to say, trying to gather whites from different parts of society, different groups, but trying to just focus them on the other, right? That group over there, right? The African Americans, right? And trying to unite them against that group. Right. So that was their purpose. Okay. Questions there? All right. We're going to take a look at document G. So this is by Eugene B. Wellborn, who's a prosperous black farmer and a state representative, right? So he was elected to state Congress. So he's going to explain how a white line attack, okay, so that's a different organization, began in Clinton, Mississippi in 1875. They had a barbecue, and there were speakers invited. It was a kind of joint discussion. Amos R. Johnston, a Democrat, spoke first. After he got through, Captain H.T. Fisher, who was a Republican, was called upon to speak. There were a couple of young fellows standing in front of me, Sibley and Thompson. These gentlemen were a committee sent from Raymond. In the event that the Republican speakers told anything that they thought was not so, they had a right to contradict them. Captain Fisher had spoke 2 or 3 minutes when this Sibley says, "Come down out of there, you goddamn radical you. We don't want to hear any more of your lies." Okay, so we're already seeing, right, there's a barbecue, right? People are speaking, right? It's a community event, right? We're going to discuss politics. We're going to have food. Okay, we're going to have people from both sides, right? So a Democrat speaks, and then when a Republican starts to speak, right, there are a few people that are sent from a neighboring city, right, from Raymond, okay, to stop him, to stop the Republican speaking, right, if the Republican starts to say anything that they disagree with. We're going to see what happens. I spoke to Alec Wilson, who was one of our officers there to keep the peace. We had about 30 men that we got the magistrate to deputize. I saw Wilson and said, "I want you to stand here and prevent anything. I see a difficulty brewing." Thompson had a bottle of whiskey in his hand. He was drinking, and every now and then they would holler, "Come down. Stop your damn lying there and come down." Okay, so right, the representative, right, the person talking this, right, Eugene B. Wellborn says that he's going to talk to one of the officers, one of the police officers, right there, who were gathered, right, to make sure nothing happens. Okay, says they had about 30 people that they deputies, right, that they got to work for them that day. So 30 other cops essentially, right, that are there to help make sure nothing gets out of hand. He says, like, we can see trouble starting to brew, right? These people, right, sent from a neighboring town, right, are yelling at this Republican, right? They've been drinking. Okay, we think there's going to be some trouble. So Wilson, right, he's one of the cops. Wilson went up to Mr. Thompson and said, Mr. Thompson, we listened very quietly to your speaker, and you must not go on in that way. He told him he was an officer and that he would have to arrest him if he did not stop. When Wilson said that, they all got right together around Thompson. He said, get away from here. Then Wilson attempted to arrest him, and Thompson pulled his pistol out and shot him down. When Wilson fell, every white man in the line pulled out their pistols and began to fire on the crowd. On Sunday, that was on Saturday, they just hunted the whole county clean out. Every man they could see, they were shooting at him just the same as birds. I mean, colored men, of course. A good many they killed, and a good many got away. The men came into Jackson, 2,000 or 3,000 of them. They were running in all day Sunday, coming in as rapidly as they could. We could hear the firing all the time. Okay, so you see, right, when the police officer, right, went up to try and calm the situation down, he gets shot, right, and then the rest of these white liners, right, start shooting everyone, right? All the African Americans, right? Shooting them there at that barbecue and then going into town and shooting them, right? So there are described as being 2,000 or 3,000 of these white liners, okay, coming into town and just shooting any African American that they see. Okay? Not for having done anything, just for being African American, right? And off by them participating in this Republican conversation, right? And supporting the Republican Party. And so we see, right, again, these terrorist acts, right, occurring throughout the South, right? This one was, in Mississippi, right? Yes, in Mississippi. Any questions there? All right, we're going to take a look at the last document, Document H. Yeah. The 1876 presidential race between Republican Rutherford B. Hayes and Democrat Samuel Tilden was extremely close. Amidst violence, intimidation, and voter fraud, the winner of the election for president and governor in 3 southern states, South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana, was disputed. These states were the last 3 former Confederate states governed by Republicans. Congress set up a special commission to decide the election, and a compromise was reached. According to the compromise of 1877, the 3 southern states would give their electoral votes for president to Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, but Democrats would be allowed to take control of the governments of those states. Hayes was inaugurated on March 5, 1877. Among his first acts was to end Northern occupation of the states still under military control. He also appointed Frederick Douglass as Marshal in the District of Columbia and a Southerner, D.M. Key of Tennessee, as Postmaster General. Hayes wrote, right, and so this is what President Hayes is going to write on April 22nd. We have got through with the South Carolina and Louisiana problems. At any rate, the troops are ordered away, and I now hope for peace, and what is equally important, security and prosperity for the colored people. The result of my plans to get from these states and by their governors, legislatures, press, and people pledges that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments shall be faithfully observed, that the colored people shall have equal rights to labor, education, and privileges of citizenship. I am confident this is a good work. Time will tell. Okay. So throughout today and yesterday, we've seen, right, the violence that's occurring in the South. Right, we've seen with organizations like the White League, the White Line, the Ku Klux Klan, Right? We've seen things like the black coats going on. Right? So we see the South wrestling with this issue and trying to prevent African Americans, right, from those rights and those equal rights, right? Being able to vote, being able treated as a equal citizen in front of the law, right? Trying to restructure society so it comes back to a situation very similar to slavery, right? We've seen that. Yeah. Now, that's with all this is happening with the Union Army, right? The Northern Army still in the South, right? And they are still protecting African Americans, right? They're still protecting, the situation to try and make sure that African Americans are allowed to vote, right? Are allowed to have these equal rights, okay? And so we saw positive things. We saw how many African Americans were voted into office. Okay, we looked at that last week, right? Getting voted into state office, right? Be members of the legislature in their states, as well as to the U.S. Congress, right? And federal government. Okay. And all that was able to happen because the Army was still there, right? Because the North was still very much involved in the South, trying to protect, right? And trying to make sure that things are changing. Okay. That's going to end when President Hayes becomes president, right? So Hayes is a Republican, right? So he does hold these similar values that, right, we want to protect African Americans, and even from a selfish reason, because he's Republican and he knows most African Americans in the South are Republican, right? He wants to make sure they can vote, but he makes a deal, right? Because the election is so close, they make a deal that he's going to become president, but he is going to end Reconstruction. So the Army is going to come out of the South. This means that the Democratic Party is going to take back over all of the South, and groups like the KKK, which were almost wiped out during Reconstruction. We see the terrible things they were doing, but it was almost destroyed, okay, with the measures that people like President Grant took to use the Army to try and combat the KKK. Almost wiped out, but when the Army leaves with the deal that Rutherford B. Hayes makes, okay, it's going to allow the South to slide backwards into this situation where they're going to use black codes. They're going to come up with Jim Crow laws. Okay, those are the laws that you guys, I'm sure, have seen studying the civil rights movement. Okay, where you have white bathrooms and colored bathrooms, right? Seats that are different for African Americans, right? For whites, right? Those laws all coming into place. Okay. So, and the KKK and other organizations being able to stick around, okay, and being able to spread even. Okay, and a lot of that happens, at least in part, because the North gives up, right? The North is exhausted, right? They fought the Civil War, okay, and now we're in 1877, right? 12 years after the Civil War, and they're still trying to change the South, right? They're still trying to deal with these issues, and they just say, no, we're done. Okay, we're going to make a deal. We're going to get the presidency. Okay, but we're going to pull out. Okay, we're not going to worry about the South anymore. Okay, and so the South is able to kind of do its own thing. Okay, and for African Americans in the South, that does not work out very well. Yeah. So, and from what Hayes said, right, he thought that they would still have some success, but that was not the case. Okay. Any questions there? Okay. So make sure that we are answering our CFU today based on these documents. Okay, there'll be another CFU tomorrow on Google Classroom, also based on these documents. If you do have questions, okay, want to know more about the situation, okay, anything like that, feel free to reach out. Google Classroom, this channel, okay, you can email me, and we'll go over that. Make sure you are getting your portfolio stuff turned in, right? That is due Friday. Okay, so getting that stuff to your house teacher, making sure that it's done as best you can. Remember, this is a promotion requirement, so getting that taken care of. Any stuff you still need to turn in for my class, make sure you are getting that turned in, right? We're wrapping things up. We're getting grades finalized. So anything you still need to get in to me, make sure you are doing that. Okay. We're not going to have a YouTube channel tomorrow. This actually may be the last one this year. I haven't decided for sure yet. Okay. But definitely will not be one tomorrow. Okay. But I will still have tutoring via Zoom on Friday. So you guys can always tune in then. Okay. 11 o'clock, just like normal. Okay. And I'll post that information on your Google Classroom. Hope you guys are doing well. Okay. Almost there, you guys. Stick with it. And I will see you guys later. Bye.